Have you ever reached a point in your life where you just let go? Not with anger, not with yelling, just a quiet, steady decision to stop trying, to step back and finally give yourself some peace? If you're over 60, you probably know what I'm talking about. It might be with friends, a partner, or, perhaps most painfully, your own grown children. You give and give and give. You listen, you forgive, you try to explain. You make excuses for their coldness. You wait for them to notice you're hurting. And then one day, something inside you shifts. You don't slam the door. You simply close it gently. That moment, that's when everything changes. Not just for you, but for them. You see, your children may not realize it right away. In fact, when you first pull back, stop calling as often, stop texting first, stop trying to patch things up, they might actually feel relieved. Finally, they might think. She stopped nagging. Or, he's not making me feel guilty anymore. They might even convince themselves that the silence means things are fine. Or better. Less pressure, more space. No more uncomfortable conversations about how they never visit, never call, never seem to care. At first it feels like freedom to them, but it's not. It's the calm before the storm. You see, when a parent walks away emotionally, after years of being the one to hold the relationship together, it might not look dramatic. There's no yelling, no accusations, just space and silence. But that silence, it's louder than any words you could have spoken. Because here's the truth. For most of your life, you've probably been the emotional anchor, the one who remembers birthdays, the one who offers support even when it's inconvenient, the one who keeps the family connected, even when no one seems to notice you're the glue. But that role is heavy. And as you get older, you start to realize that it's not your job to keep carrying it. Especially not for grown children who treat your love as a given rather than a gift. So you stop. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And while your kids might interpret that first silence as peace, what they don't realize is that your silence isn't temporary. It's not a tactic. It's not emotional manipulation. It's your nervous system finally saying, "I've had enough." They don't see it right away. In the beginning, they may even feel more comfortable, like they can finally breathe. But that comfort won't last. Because slowly, quietly, your absence begins to echo louder than your presence ever did. They'll scroll through their messages one day and notice it's been weeks since they heard from you. Not just days, weeks. They'll go to tell you something and remember. Wait, I haven't talked to Mom in a while. Or, Dad hasn't checked in lately. That's when the first flicker of discomfort appears. And make no mistake, like it is discomfort even if they won't admit it. Because your children are used to you being there. Even when they ignore you, you're there. Even when they pull away, you show up. And now, for the first time, they're left alone with themselves. And that's where the nightmare begins. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you stopped doing everything right for them. You see, when your kids are young, they depend on you for everything. As they grow older, they start to pull away. That's natural. But some adult children keep pulling until you're barely holding on by a thread. And yet, you still try. You send birthday cards they never reply to. You offer help they don't acknowledge. You bite your tongue when they say something that stings. All in the name of love. But when that love is constantly taken for granted, when your kindness is mistaken for weakness, something changes inside you. You stop chasing. And what happens when the chaser stops chasing? The one who's been running now has to turn around and face what and who they've been running from. It's easy for adult children to blame their parents. You didn't do this right. You were too involved. You weren't involved enough. It's easier to point fingers than to reflect. But your silence, that powerful, peaceful silence, becomes a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. Suddenly, they're confronted with all the things they ignored, the times they were too busy to call, the moments you needed support and they weren't there, the memories they brushed aside because they were inconvenient. And that mirror, it makes them uncomfortable. Because now, they can't hide behind your efforts. Your presence no longer covers their absence. Your calls no longer distract from their silence. In those quiet days after you've walked away, really walked away in your heart, they're left to sit with a truth they never wanted to face. They were loved deeply and didn't love back the same way. And that realization, whether it comes softly or like a punch in the gut, is what starts to unravel their illusion of freedom. It's not freedom they're feeling anymore. It's distance, it's absence, and it hurts. But here's the part they never expected. You're not angry. You're not bitter, you're just done. And that more than anything shakes them to their core. Because as long as you were trying, they could stay in denial. But now you're living your life. You're choosing peace. You're no longer asking to be seen, you're seeing yourself. And in that beautiful act of self-respect, you've done something powerful. You've stopped participating in a relationship that made you feel small. That doesn't mean you stopped loving them. No, the love is still there, steady and quiet, like a light left on in a hallway. But you've stopped pouring from your own cup until you're empty. You've stopped explaining your worth to people who should have known it all along. And without you constantly reminding them of your love, your effort, your presence, they're finally left to notice what life feels like without it. And that's when the silence starts to sting. There's a moment, it doesn't happen right away, but there's a moment when your silence finally settles in their chest. At first, they brushed it off. Maybe they thought you were just busy or moody or trying to teach them a lesson. Maybe they assumed you'd come around. You always have, after all. But then more time passes, and something strange happens. The silence that once gave them relief starts to feel heavy, unsettling. Your absence becomes louder than any lecture, more painful than any argument. Because it's not just that you stopped calling, it's that you stopped reaching, stopped giving, stopped waiting at the emotional door with a warm smile and open arms. You stopped hoping. And that's what gets them. They begin to notice the little things first. Holidays feel emptier. There's no reminder from you about birthdays or family events. The house feels quieter when they visit, if they still visit. They start checking their phone and seeing no message from you. No photos, no, just checking in. No, how are you feeling today? And slowly, that eerie peace they thought they wanted, it starts to crack. Because people don't truly appreciate presence until it becomes absence. And your presence, steady, patient, forgiving, was something they assumed would always be there. But now it's gone. Not out of cruelty, but because you finally chose your own peace. This is when regret begins to whisper. They start remembering all the things they shrugged off. The times you asked them to stop by and they were too busy. The calls they sent to voicemail. The gentle reminders they saw as nagging. The love that showed up in small, steady ways, now replaced by silence they don't know how to fill. And here's where it starts to hurt them deeply. Not because you're punishing them, but because they start to realize you meant more than they ever let themselves feel. This isn't guilt, not yet. Guilt comes from getting caught. What they feel now is loss. A deep, aching, slow-blooming loss. Not of what they had, but what they could have had if they'd been more present, more grateful, more loving. They'll think of conversations they cut short, the visits they skipped, the times they chose everything and everyone else over you, believing, of course, that you'd always be waiting at the edge of their lives. But you're not waiting anymore. And that stillness, that emptiness where your voice used to be, It's like a mirror reflecting every missed moment, every closed door, every kind gesture they didn't return. And then the questions begin. Why haven't I called? Why didn't I take her seriously when she said she was tired? Why didn't I notice how often he reached out, and how I barely reached back? These questions don't come with quick answers. They arrive in the quiet hours, driving alone, folding laundry, standing in the shower, when their guard is down, and your memory is right there, soft but piercing. And what stings most isn't what you said before you left. It's what you didn't say. There were no dramatic exits, no guilt-tripping speeches. You didn't slam the door. You just disappeared from the role you once played so faithfully. They start wondering, are they okay? Not just physically, but emotionally. Did I hurt them? Did they stop calling because I pushed them too far? The questions grow heavier because they don't have your voice to soften them. There's no comfort, no reassurance, just silence and their own thoughts. And that's where the pain truly sets in. Because now they're not thinking about the arguments or frustrations. They're remembering the warmth, the soft-spoken love, the steady presence, the home-cooked meals, the encouraging words, the way you looked at them, even when they didn't deserve it, like they were still your whole world. They're remembering the kind of love that didn't shout, didn't demand, but was always there. And they're realizing it's gone. You see, the longer they sit with that silence, the more they start to feel everything you felt. Not as a lecture, but as a mirror. They begin to understand why you stopped trying. They begin to feel for the first time the weight you carried in that relationship. It's not easy for them to face, because when someone has gotten used to being loved without earning it, they never imagine what it will feel like when that love stops showing up. But now they know, and that's when the ache begins to grow. They might start reaching out, not with apologies, not at first. Just little feelers, a vague message, a holiday text, a comment on a photo. Hey, thinking about you. Hope you're okay. But those aren't real reconnections. They're probes, attempts to see if the old pattern is still alive, if you'll jump back in the moment they crack the door. And when you don't, that's when panic starts to rise. Because now they realize you're not playing the game anymore. You're not chasing. You're not waiting. You're not holding the door open. And they're no longer sure how to reach you. Not because you're far away, but because you're no longer emotionally available to rescue them from themselves. And that's when regret starts to scream. It screams in the memories they now cling to, in the photos they scroll through late at night, in the voicemail they suddenly find and replay over and over just to hear your voice again. It screams in the way they finally see you, not as a background figure in their life, but as the person who always loved them, even when they gave you so little in return. And the truth is, by the time they hear that scream, by the time they feel the depth of what they've lost, you're already building a life where your peace doesn't depend on them anymore. And that might be the hardest part for them to accept. You've stopped needing their approval, their time, their attention, because you finally realize that your love deserves to be received, not just tolerated. What you did, walking away, wasn't cruel. It was necessary, because your soul was tired. Your spirit was worn down. And deep down, you knew. Staying would have cost you too much. And now they know it too. Not because you told them, but because they can feel it in every quiet second, in every unopened message, in every missed call they finally make, that no one answers. This is the turning point, the unraveling, the moment where they finally see the cost of what they took for granted. And that, more than anything, is where their nightmare truly begins. There comes a point when regret stops being about what happened and starts being about what didn't. The visit they never made, the apology they never gave, the love they never returned. At first, it was easy for your children to explain it all away. She's just sensitive. Dad gets like this sometimes. They brushed off your silence as a phase, a mood, a strategy. But now it's been months, maybe longer, and the excuses are wearing thin because your absence hasn't faded. It's grown louder. And now they're not just noticing it. They're living inside it. This is the part they never expected. The moment when the silence isn't about you anymore. It's about them. They start asking harder questions. Not the kind that look outward, but the kind that dig deep. Why didn't I call? Why was I so quick to judge? What was I really so busy doing that I couldn't take 10 minutes to check on the person who raised me? They sit in rooms you once filled with warmth, and they notice the stillness. The empty chair at the table, the unreturned calls, the holidays that feel colder, the birthdays that pass without your voice singing on the other end of the line, and slowly, painfully, the denial begins to peel away, because it's no longer just your silence they're facing. It's their own behavior, their own avoidance, their own lack of effort. They begin to realize that they weren't just inattentive. They were absent. And not because you demanded too much, but because they gave too little. And that is a hard truth to swallow. You see, it's easy to blame parents, to point to the past, to say, you should have done this better. But when you walked away, calmly, silently, you took away their scapegoat. There's no argument to win anymore. No one to project blame onto, just the echo of their own choices. And now they sit in that echo, trying to find the courage to admit the truth. They hurt someone who only ever wanted to love them. They go over conversations in their head. The last time you spoke, the tone in your voice, the words you said or didn't say. They remember that one visit when you seemed quieter than usual, or that birthday they missed. The time you called just to talk, and they rushed you off the phone. And it all starts to come together like a puzzle they never knew they were building. This is the moment of realization, the mirror moment, when they finally see themselves not through their own eyes, but through yours. And it stings. Because now they understand that love isn't just about feeling, it's about showing up. And they didn't. They didn't show up when you needed support. They didn't ask how you were really doing. They didn't offer comfort when you were grieving, or lonely, or quietly aching for connection. And now you're gone. Not in body, but in spirit. You've pulled your love inward. You've stopped trying to be heard by people who weren't listening. And for the first time, they understand. You weren't the problem. You were the thread holding the whole thing together. This is where guilt begins to transform into grief. Not just the grief of missing you, but the grief of who they were when they had the chance to do better. And didn't. It's a strange, aching grief. Because you're still here. Alive. But emotionally, you've moved on. You've reclaimed your time, your energy, your joy. And they're just now realizing how far behind they are. Not in age, but in emotional maturity. They start reflecting, maybe even journaling. They replay memories. Sometimes they even dream about you. Dreams where you're warm and laughing and full of life. And they wake up with tears in their eyes. Not because you're gone, but because they finally feel how much they've missed. They may not tell anyone. Because how do you explain that you took someone for granted for years, and now you feel like a piece of your soul has gone quiet? Some of them will try to reconnect, tentatively, with a hesitant message. Hey, just thinking of you. Miss you. Maybe even, I'm sorry. But others? They'll stay silent. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to bridge the distance they created. They're afraid they waited too long, that too much damage was done, that you won't or can't let them back in. And the truth is, You might not. Not fully. Because now you've built a new kind of life. One with boundaries. One with peace. One where your joy doesn't hinge on whether or not they call you back. You've started pouring your time into people who value you. Into friends who reach out first. Into hobbies that light you up. Into quiet mornings where you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. And that life, it's sacred. Because you earned it. So when your children finally face themselves, when the regret turns into reflection, and the reflection into remorse, they come to a crossroads. They can either grow or stay stuck in their own guilt. The ones who choose growth may try to reach you with new eyes, softer hearts, more honest words. And even if the relationship never goes back to what it was, it may become something more real, more respectful, more mutual. But that only happens if they're willing to face what they once refused to see. That love is not owed, it's offered. And when it's mishandled, it doesn't always stay. That realization is not just painful, it's transformative. Because it forces them to reckon with what kind of person they want to be moving forward. And that is the beginning of healing. Pain can do one of two things. It can harden a person, or it can soften them in all the right places. When your children finally sit with the truth of what they lost when you stopped trying, something begins to shift. It's not immediate. Growth never is. But little by little, the walls they built to protect themselves from discomfort begin to crack. Not because you forced them to change, but because you stepped back and gave them space to finally see the impact of their actions, without your effort masking it. You see, for years, your love covered for their distance. Your warmth hid their coldness. Your forgiveness shielded them from their own mistakes. But now, with the noise gone, they can hear themselves. And for the first time, they don't like what they hear. This is where healing begins, not just for them, but for you too. Because here's the truth. Walking away doesn't mean you stopped loving them. It means you started loving yourself more. And that decision, to choose peace over pleasing, dignity over drama, it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And now, that choice is teaching them a lesson no lecture ever could. Some will resist it. They'll distract themselves, blame others, try to avoid the ache. But others, they'll sit in it. They'll feel it fully. And in that discomfort, they'll begin to change. They'll start showing up differently. Not just with you, but with everyone. They'll begin to speak more kindly, to listen more deeply, to ask instead of assume. Because they now know what it feels like to be on the losing end of love they thought would never leave. And for you, the one who walked away, there's healing too. You may still feel a twinge of sadness. You may still wish things had been easier, but you'll also feel lighter, stronger, clearer. Because for the first time in a long time, you're not chasing. You're not trying to be understood by people who refuse to listen. You've stepped into your own life and claimed it. Maybe you're reconnecting with old friends. Maybe you've started traveling again or learning something new. Maybe your days are quieter, but filled with the kind of peace that used to feel out of reach. You've stopped pouring from an empty cup. And now you're watering your own garden. And if your children do come back, truly come back, it won't be out of guilt, it'll be out of growth. And that's a relationship worth building. One that starts from a place of mutual respect, not obligation, of honesty, not habit. But even if they never do, your journey remains valid. Because healing isn't about getting people to change. It's about releasing the need for them too. You've done your part. You loved well. You tried hard. And now you rest in the truth that your value never depended on their appreciation. That's the beautiful paradox of walking away. You didn't do it to punish anyone. You did it to save yourself. And in doing so, you created the one thing your children never knew they needed: a mirror. A mirror that showed them their reflection clearly, and hopefully a path back to their own hearts. So if you're watching this right now and wondering, did I do the right thing? Let me tell you this: you did. You chose peace over pain, self-respect over self-sacrifice. And that is never the wrong decision. If your heart feels heavy, know that it won't always. The ache softens, the space fills with new joy, new light, new connection, often from unexpected places. Because once you stop begging to be loved, you start discovering just how much love exists outside of the places that hurt you. And for your children, if they're willing, this pain can become a turning point, a chance to rewrite the story, to stop the cycle, to learn to love without control, without conditions, without distance. Because love doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, the bravest love is the quiet kind, the kind that walks away and still hopes for better from afar. So here's what I want you to remember today. Wherever you are in your journey, you didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because you finally started caring about yourself. You're not selfish. You're wise. You're not bitter. You're healing. You're not weak. You're free. And that freedom, it's what gives others the chance to grow if they're brave enough to meet you there. So if this message touched something inside you, I want you to leave a comment. Share your story. Tell us, have you ever had to walk away from someone you love? What did it teach you? Or maybe you were the one someone walked away from, and you're trying to make your way back. Either way, your voice matters here. If this video gave you comfort or clarity, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Strong Elderly Life, because every week we talk about real healing, real emotions, and the real strength it takes to grow in our later years. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. You're not invisible. You are powerful. You are wise. And most importantly, you are still becoming. Take care of yourself. Take your time. And as always, keep choosing you. I'll see you in the next one.